I want to introduce us real quick. My name is Hampton Dortch. I'm an account executive here at WildSpark. This is Josh Swing. He is right across the hall from me. He is also an account executive here at WildSpark. And then Rachel, our director of marketing, that really helps us put all of this together. And we've been doing this for a couple months, several months now at this point. And if something ever happens, if you don't hear from us next month or the one after that, then something is wrong, because we are committing to do this every month, rain or shine. That doesn't matter because we're inside, but rain and shine, we'll be here every month. So what are we going to be talking about today, Rachel? If you can go to that next slide, a couple of things to be thinking about. We're getting serious here. We've got to be brutally honest. And I'm even going to be thinking about my own life as I walk through this, because I promise you that we all have things to work on. If we think that we don't, then we probably need to be at this webinar because we need to be much more self-aware. But the first question I want you to really be thinking and be honest about is, how well do you know your tendencies? How well do you know your tendencies? The next question is a little bit deeper. Do you know how others experience you? For those of us that are married, you probably you might be hearing this a lot, at least at home or with some of your best friends at work. I think that this is where we run into some challenges more often. But like, think about it. Do you really know how others are experiencing you? I think I make assumptions about that. But one thing you'll get on this webinar today is we're probably going to tell you to ask people how they experience you. And that can be scary. And the final question is, are you aware of the impact they're having on other people? Personally, I don't have a cat. If I had a cat, it would have a horrible impact on me. I'm not dogging on cat lovers here. It's because I'm allergic to them. But really, are you aware of the impact that you are having on other people? And I think in the workplace, we don't think about these things a lot, and they're really important to talk about. They're hard to talk about. We need to be brutally honest. So, Rachel, if you go to the next slide, one thing that we're going to talk about is your leadership success truly hangs in the balance of your answers to these questions. And so, emotional intelligence. We're going to be talking a lot about that today. It's the ability to perceive, use, understand, and manage your emotions. And so people with emotional intelligence, they can recognize their own emotions and those of others. They can use emotional information to guide thinking and behavior. They can discern between different feelings and label them appropriately. And they can adjust emotions to adapt to environments.
Can I talk about the problem a little bit, Hampton?
I think you can, Swing. Talk about it.
Jump in here. So clearly, emotional intelligence is really important. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But I've got some shocking statistics. I'm going to look over here on my screen so I don't mess up any of these statistics. But there is a psychologist. Her name is Tasha Eurich. And she did a ton of research on emotional intelligence, specifically within workplaces. And what she found was when people are asked to evaluate themselves, 90% of people believe that they have a high level of emotional intelligence. 90%. That's a lot of people. And y'all are probably already out there listening like, no way. Like, I know more than 10% of the population that is not emotionally intelligent. So I know this doesn't check out. But when their skills, those same 90% of people who said that they were highly emotionally intelligent, when their skills were evaluated by an expert in emotional intelligence, actually come to find out 10% actually had high levels of emotional intelligence. Very different here in the numbers. It totally flip-flops from 90% and 10% saying they wouldn't consider themselves to be highly emotionally intelligent to 10%. Only 10% are actually highly emotionally intelligent and 90% are not. And so what we know to be true is there is a disconnect in the world that we live in today, that the way that we think that people experience us is very different from the way that they actually experience us. And there's this concept, we're going to dig more into this here in a second, called biomythography, that I found when doing a little bit of research on emotional intelligence. And the definition of that, it's a writing style, actually, a composition style that weaves together some biography, some history, and some myth. And I know that we're all guilty of this in our lives. We tell ourselves these stories that aren't always true. We're so quick to make ourselves to be the hero in the story and make everybody else to be the villain. And so clearly there's an issue here, but what's at stake, right? What's at stake with this problem? What if we don't fix this? And so what's at stake is that we know that our present and future success is dependent on emotional intelligence. It's just some statistics here. It's hard to say really fast. 90% of top performers have a high level of emotional intelligence. 90%. Almost every top performer is emotionally intelligent. Emotional intelligence is responsible for 58% of your job performance. And I think in the workplace, in our world today, we're way too technically focused. We probably put 90% of our time, energy, and effort on technical skills and 10% on leadership skills. And I could argue that it should be the opposite, but a majority of our success is determined by our emotional intelligence, not our technical intelligence for whatever role that we're in. And people with higher emotional intelligence, they get more out of life because they make the most of relationships. So really what's at stake here, if we're playing this out, if we think that we're emotionally intelligent and we actually aren't, if we think that people are experiencing us some way, but they're experiencing some way completely different, they think that we're a jerk, then chances are they're not going to work for you for very long. People will tolerate poor behavior for a period of time, but eventually they will take less money to go somewhere else and not have to work with you. Or even worse, right? What if this plays out in your personal life? What if, right, kids disengage with you because they perceive you as being too busy or not caring? Or what if friends stop asking to hang out with you? What if relationships fall to the wayside because there is a lack of emotional intelligence that's present? We don't want that for anybody. I certainly don't want that for myself. And so let's unpack the solution. Let's stop talking about all the negative stuff. Let's talk about how do we make it better. So take it away, Rachel.
Yeah. So in light of what's at stake, and I also think too, just the topic of emotional intelligence, in a lot of ways, it's just really misunderstood, right? Before I was able to take a deep dive on this, I would actually get a lot of the steps misplaced, right? There's no way that you can be emotionally intelligent in the aspect of reading the room or reading others if you're not first completely in tune with yourself. You can't identify emotions in others if you can't identify emotions in yourself. So that leads me to some of the solutions we're going to share today so that you can put this stuff into practice, so that it can be less ambiguous and less overwhelming. But there are some tried and true processes that we have at WildSpark that we teach in our platform that if you cultivate this on a monthly or a weekly or even a daily basis before you go into meetings with people or spend time with your team, you are going to grow in your emotional intelligence. And then I guarantee you'll see so many other areas of your life skyrocket as a byproduct of that. So one thing that we teach and talk about at WildSpark, hold on just a second. There we go, is the 3 R's of emotional intelligence. We're going to go over this process here in just a second, but the 3 R's of emotional intelligence really help you see kind of these 3 stages that you can move through and operate through in order to grow your emotional intelligence skills and grow your self-awareness skills. But then also we have a really cool worksheet. We're going to give all of you guys an interactive worksheet today after the webinar called the Know Self to Lead Self model. I always get that name flipped. I always say the lead self to know self. So I'm really glad that I was able to read it off the screen. But the Know Self to Lead Self model is a super helpful tool that you can keep on your computer or print out a copy and keep on your desk in your workplace, or even just distribute to your team. And it's just a really great framework to work through some of those tendencies or things that you find keep you from being the most emotionally intelligent person. And so the reality, though, is that the solution is understanding that this stuff is not ingrained in us from birth. It's something that is learned. It's something that is cultivated. And I truly believe that we all can become more self and socially aware if we just have the right tools and we have the right understanding. So many managers are out there today. They're in the trenches. They're put in positions where they're leading teams, or the company has put a lot on their shoulders, and they're just unequipped, right? And so our mission at WildSpark is to make sure that every leader, every manager is equipped, that they feel confident, that they have the tools to do what they've been tasked to do. So I'm excited about these solutions that we're going to share with you today, but leaders really are going to be able to grow in knowing their tendencies, knowing their strengths, and then as a result, really understanding their impact on others. So Hampton, I'm going to let you go ahead and dive into what those 3 R's are.
Okay. So here are the 3 R's: recognize, read, and respond. Recognize, read, and respond. So recognize, this is self-awareness. So it's the ability to understand your strengths, weaknesses, tendencies, and patterns of behavior. So being able to know yourself, you've got to recognize those tendencies. Then you have to be able to read. So that's social awareness. So the ability to read those around you, being in tune with how others view the world and how you can adapt what you do to bring out the best in them. We talk a lot about leading everyone differently. You can't lead everybody the same. You've got to have that social awareness and read the room. And then finally, respond. So this is self-regulation, the ability to control your emotions when you find yourself in triggering situations. All of these are extremely important. I'm going to sit on respond for just a second before passing it to Swing to talk about recognize. If you want to go back to that slide real quick. There is someone I know, his name's Tim Spiker. You can look him up. He's done an amazing study on, he really talks a lot about leadership being about who you are way more than what you do. Of course, what you do is important, but we really want to think about who you are. So he did this study where he had these 8 different leadership qualities, things like thinking strategically, setting direction, motivating and inspiring, recruiting top talent, and all of those things that you think about when you think of a great leader. But there were 2 qualities after surveying over 10,000 people. And if anyone wants to see this study, I can send it to you after. But after surveying 10,000 people, they found that 77% of leadership came down to 2 of these 8 qualities. Like, in other words, if you made it a pizza and there were 8 slices, 2 of those slices would make up 77% of this pie. And those 2 leadership qualities were being inwardly sound and others focused. And so inwardly sound and others focused, let's unpack that just for a second. So I think we can all agree, we all understand what others focused, what that means. That's like really genuinely focusing on other people and leading people differently and knowing what they need. So when they do consulting and help people grow in these areas, they focus on others focus first, because that one's really easy to work on. It's like, are you caring about other people? Are you focusing on them or not? The inwardly sound one, that takes a lot longer. And I think about that 90% of people that are saying they're emotionally intelligent that really aren't. That inwardly sound piece, I think, is crucial. And so I'm kind of going on a rant here, but I think it's important because the respond piece, think about the best leader you know. When you come to them, how do they respond? If it's like crazy news, if it's great news, if it's bad news, are you nervous about how they're going to respond? So I'll read that definition. This is self-regulation, the ability to control your emotions when you find yourself in triggering situations. So when I'm being led by someone, I want to go to somebody that's focused on me, that's going to listen to what I'm saying, and that I'm not fearful of their response because I know they genuinely know me and care about me. So I'm going to pass it to Swing to talk about recognize.
Man, that was powerful, Hampton. I'm getting so much out of this already. Just getting to be a part of this webinar. We do want to camp out first here on recognize, and we'll actually spend a majority of the time here because what we know is that the recognize stage in the 3 R's is the foundation of the other 2. And so what's impossible to do is to move past recognize without having the self-awareness that you need to be able to really grasp this step. And so we're going to focus first on hitting this one out of the park before we move into the other 2 R's. I am really excited to share an overarching kind of map of where we'll go from this. But I wanted to also point out that the order in which we're talking about these is really important. So Hampton, you even mentioned inwardly sound and others focus. The others focus part is typically the easiest part. Inwardly sound is typically the most difficult. And what's important for us to be effective at being others focused, we have to be inwardly sound first. And I think if we want to be able to read and respond, we have to be able to recognize first. So let's start here. Let's camp out here. Hampton, break down just an overarching map of where we'll go with this. And then I want to get into some details on how we can be better at recognizing.
Yeah. So Rachel, if you can go to that next slide of the map, I'll be able to show this. So this is powerful. I think about this a lot, and we're going to give you, as you look at this, you're probably going to be able to think of things if you have an ounce of self-awareness, that this is you, but we're also going to give you tools to how to get there in a minute. But let's think about our tendencies. So my hardwired or learned inclinations towards a particular characteristic or behavior. So what are my tendencies? So those tendencies lead me to action. And so the action I take from the patterns of behavior formed by my tendencies. So once I take these actions, it impacts people. It doesn't just impact me, it impacts others. And so the impact of my behavior is having on those people around me. And then ultimately that leads to the reality, which is the environment or culture I'm creating as a result of my behavior. And so again, you might have some ideas that you're already thinking in your mind right now. But let's go to that next slide and show you this worksheet, and we'll send this to you after. But a couple things that are coming to mind, and I'm going to switch to my slide on my screen so I can see it a little bit larger. We're going to have a little bit of confession moment with me. I'll talk you through something that I've learned for myself as I've gone through this. So if I'm looking at my tendency, it's my tendency when I'm interacting with other people, if I feel like I have a lot going on, which we all do, but my tendency is to be in a hurry and not truly listen to someone. And so the manifested action is, if I'm in the office, Swing and Rachel can attest to this, maybe they're telling me something, but I'm slowly backing away. And in my mind, I'm being efficient because I'm listening, but what that's telling to them, which is the impact, is maybe what I'm saying isn't that important to Hampton right now. And so the reality is there's probably a level of disconnect or trust that's being broken as I'm backing away and saying wherever I'm going is maybe more important than what you're telling me. And so the adapted action could lead to them next time not telling me whatever it is, or being worried about how I'm going to respond when they share something with me. And so my adapted action of like, what do I do here? It's when someone starts talking to me, I'm going to stand with 2 feet in one place. I'm going to look them in the eyes and I'm going to nod and listen to understand instead of listen to respond. So that's just an example of, as I've worked through this in my own life, of something that I'm trying to work on. And hopefully Swing and Rachel have seen some growth in me. Anyways, let's go to the next slide.
You're doing great, Hampton.
Thanks.
Okay, let's dig into what does it look like to actually find out what your tendencies are. So Hampton, thank you for being vulnerable with us and just sharing an example of what one of your unhealthy tendencies may be that has great intentions behind it because you want to be efficient and effective and maximize your work, but can also have negative consequences if you really step back and ask yourself the question, what is it like to be on the other side of me in that situation when you're having that conversation? And so I think that's where we start. We ask ourselves that question, what is it like to be on the other side of me? I've got a great quote for us first before we really dig into that question. I'm going to read this for us. To know yourself, you must sacrifice the illusion that you already do. I'll read that again. To know yourself, you must sacrifice the illusion that you already do. What I talked about earlier is that we have this biomythography that we tell ourselves about how other people experience us. And if we really want to grow as leaders, we got to remove that illusion of thinking that we know it all, right? We're as self-aware as we possibly can be. Hampton, you said something earlier that really resonated with me. It's a process. It's like, because I'm healthy right now doesn't mean I can stop eating vegetables for the rest of my life. I have to continue eating vegetables if I want to continue to be healthy. Just like we have to continuously ask ourselves these questions if we want to continue to be self-aware. And the irony of self-awareness is that it takes an extremely high level of self-awareness to realize that you are not actually self-aware, that you have blind spots, and that people don't always experience you the way that you think that they do. And so I've got some questions to even drill down and make this easier for us. And this comes from a good friend of mine's book called Leveling Up. A guy named Ryan Leake wrote this book. It's fantastic. It just released. I'd highly recommend it for anybody that's looking to continue to grow in self-awareness. But I'm going to read off a couple of these questions to get you all thinking about some areas of added self-awareness that you need in your life? What is it like to be on the other side of my emails? What is it like to be on the other side of my parenting? What is it like to be on the other side of my text? What is it like to be on the other side of my Facebook comments? What is it like to be on the other side of my marriage? What is it like to be related to me? What is it like to be in meetings with me? What is it like to work with me? What is it like to work for me? What is it like to follow me? What is it like to be on the sidelines of my kids' game with me? What is it like to be coached by me? What is it like to be on a team with me? What is it like to travel with me? What is it like to do holidays with me? So the list starts here, but this is really powerful to reflect on really all the different areas of your life of how you are being experienced. And so what has to happen first is we have to go back and be brutally honest, like Hampton talked about earlier, with ourselves on some of these questions and realize that we may not be all that we think that we're cracked up to be, and to start there before we take some steps to further understand ourselves. So let's shift from focusing on self-awareness to focusing on some of our strengths of where we could be really good. Rach.
Sorry, guys. I was having trouble with my my mute button.
You're good.
I'm also just like, after reading those questions, we may need to pause for 10 minutes and I'll answer those questions. I'm like, golly, those are great questions to be asking.
Yeah, for sure. I think the two that were super convicting were like, what is it like to be on the other side of my emails? Just thinking in like a work context, like that says a lot. Like when you get a short email versus, I'm not saying every email has to be with like, good day, sir, how are you? But there's just something to be said about being a person who sends pleasant emails in the workplace. But yeah, so part of knowing yourself is also knowing your strengths. I think that our strengths, they are the things that we do have tendencies towards. They're things that bring us life and that bring us energy. But we also have to be careful with our strengths, because if we lean into them too much, I think one time I heard somebody say like, it's like staring into the sun. Like I heard somebody say that about somebody else when this person is like on, right? So even when you are operating in a strength, like you have to operate in a way where it's life-giving to others, right? And you also have to be aware of your weaknesses, because that's when you're probably having not the greatest impact on others, right? If something like really drains you or you dread doing it, and especially if you're like doing that particular task or project with a group of people, you probably give off like a level of energy to others that's like not the most encouraging to be around, right? So finding your strengths, finding the things that give you life or give you joy or that you enjoy doing, even if you're poured out when you're done with them. Generally, from a self-awareness perspective, it really helps launch you into like the activities and the type of collaboration with your team that's going to be life-giving to everybody. I also think it's great to know your strengths. That way you can build to your weaknesses, or to know your strengths. It really helps you incorporate other members of your team. So we are big on assessments here at WildSpark. And in a second, I'm going to show you the kind of the cornerstone assessment that we have in our platform. But we do all of them: Strengths Finders, Working Genius, LBDNA, what's Colby? I mean, we Enneagram, all of them. Like the OG Myers-Briggs personality test, right? Like a lot of people don't like feel like some of those might put them in a box, but a lot of them can be really illuminating to like how you can build to your weaknesses and make others better and others shine in their strengths. And one way that when any person comes into the WildSpark platform and we launch a team of people into their leadership development journey, the first thing that they go through is the DISC assessment. And a lot of you probably know the DISC assessment. It's really well used in a lot of workplaces, but that's something that's always on your WildSpark profile, so that as you're going through lessons, I mean, we have some people who've been using WildSpark for 5 years, right? And they're still getting new content every month, right, to go through with their team, but they're still able to come back and look at the stuff that they've worked through. So from a self-awareness perspective, there's this portfolio of stuff. And then we place the DISC assessment right there on their profile so that others can go and see. And I've done this. Like I've gone and looked up different team members in WildSpark to see what their DISC result is, to understand like how we work together. So some people might feel like assessments are corny or cheesy or they put you in a box, but I can tell you firsthand, I used to be a naysayer. I came to WildSpark and now I'm a raving fan because they really do help me be better, not just for myself, but more importantly for my team and for others, right? So a big part is not only just knowing your tendencies, but knowing your strengths. And that's going to give you a really good picture of and be really self-aware of like who you are and what you look like in a work context. Because we could talk a lot about what this means for you as a parent, as a spouse, as a brother or sister, and all of those things are important. But here, when we're talking about emotional intelligence in the workplace, this type of stuff is really going to help you be the best team member possible.
That's good, Rachel. I'll even add in a little caveat here. We did the Working Genius recently at our offsite, and it was so powerful. It's another great assessment to throw in there. What you just said resonated so much with me, talking about being aware of your strengths, and strengths taken to the extreme can also be a weakness. The staring at the sun analogy that you used was spectacular. I would even love to hear from some of my guests. I know for me, that's getting like too caught up in the moment. I am hyper relational, but a lot of times I can steamroll other conversations that I was supposed to be having because I get caught up in the moment with that specific person or that specific meeting. And so it's great to be fully present all the time, but it's not great to be disrespectful to other people's time by taking that to the absolute extreme. I'm sure a lot of our listeners, our watchers here are even starting to think about what are some of those strengths that I have that when taken too far could be a blind spot for me or an area of weakness for me. So post some of those in the chat here. I'd love to see how some people are processing what Rachel's sharing here while Rachel unpacks more about the read and respond R's in the process.
And I'll be vulnerable one more time. This is just like confession time with me about my life. But while you all are thinking, I'll give you an example of one. I really value speed and efficiency and maximizing time and everything. And that can work extremely well in a lot of different contexts. One that I don't think it works well in is relationships, whether that's at work or with your family or with your spouse. Like there's no hack to just really, I think time is what ultimately builds real and authentic relationships. And so I think that sometimes me just wanting to go and be efficient in all that I do can lead to me not treating people necessarily the way that they want to be treated. Or I assume that everyone views the world through the lens in which I do. And so if somebody values those same things, we can just like shoot back and forth with each other and connect. But a lot of people aren't that way. And so my lack of self-awareness at times leads to people feel like I'm just walking all over them.
Yeah.
If anyone would be so bold, you can share with us in the chat.
Yeah, if you've got like certain tendencies or things in your DISC assessment, we want to hear. Would love to know if like my DISC assessment goes like this. And so I know that the one thing that I think is most helpful is like the Enneagram assessment. What it does is it like tells you how if you're not managing like your strengths well. I think the worst rap, like the Enneagram that gets the baddest rap is definitely Enneagram 8, which is what I am. But basically, I remember the first time I read Enneagram 8 and what it's like when they're like not self-aware, not committed to like a personal development journey. It basically sounded like Voldemort for any of you Harry Potter fans out there. And I was just like, oh man.
I've heard it referenced as 8 holes, Rachel, for added context.
Yeah, black holes that just like suck everything in. Yeah. So anyway, that's a perfect example. Don't be a Voldemort. It's a perfect example of how you can know your strengths, operate in your strengths, but then be aware of how they can be weaknesses and you've got to learn how to manage them. So, but so we've spent a lot of time on the first R, which is recognize. And we say, and we believe here at WildSpark that the foundation and the essence of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. So I think it deserves the most time. However, once you become somebody who is really self-aware, you know your tendencies, you know your strengths, and you kind of understand those things about yourself, really the next and the most important parts that you can practice on a daily basis is how you read the room, how you read others, and then how you respond. So if you're a note taker, if you're sitting and taking notes, I can give you I've got a few bullet points to really help you learn how to read, because on that worksheet we're going to send you, that middle bar is impact. And we're going to ask you to assess the impact that your tendencies have on others, because that creates reality. And if you want to change your reality, you want to be a more emotionally intelligent person, you really have to be able to hone in on impact as well. So I would say first and foremost, when you are engaging with others, look at their level of interest with you. Like if you're in a one-on-one or a team meeting with somebody and they're just kind of looking at their phone, looking at their watch, looking around and trying to just wait for the meeting to be over, there's probably something going on there in terms of their level of interest in spending time with you. And check their engagement too. Like, are they asking good questions that, logically follow a level of engagement with you? Are they giving like good dialogue with you? Or is it all just very bland, surface level, unengaged? Look at body language, right? Look at how when you are operating in a certain way or from a certain tendency, how are others physically responding, right? I know there are a lot of sayings out there about how most language is body language. Most of it's unspoken. And then also just think and assess the relationship, right? Like, if you have a relationship with somebody on your team, is that relationship growing? Like, are you guys working well together, working better together, tackling issues, or is it staying stagnant, right? And then finally, I would say learn about other viewpoints and so that you can respect other viewpoints. Something that our CEO, Cord Sachs, says is that not everybody sees the world the same way as you, and not everybody is led the same, right? And so we're big advocates and proponents at WildSpark, and we have lots of content in our platform about tweaking your leadership style and perspective for the person you're leading, right? And so get to know other viewpoints, respect other viewpoints, ask people about their viewpoint and how they would want to be led, right? All of these things are great ways to read others or read a room or a team of people to help you understand the impact that you might be having on them when you're operating in some of your tendencies. And then, moving over into that last and final R that we've talked about, respond, right? I think once you've got all of this information, it can be really tempting to tell yourself a negative story. And I think it's important to understand what your negative stories are, right? When you've got a lot of information or you're overwhelmed with something, I think often our default is to tell ourselves a negative story. But being able to understand your negative story, your positive story, and to be able to like kind of understand your triggers for how you might operate like in a negative way or from a negative tendency that you have, that is really going to help you be proactive when those triggers happen in your environment. So planning ahead for those triggers, planning ahead about how you're going to respond. Like it might be something as simple as, hey, I've got 3 meetings on the books today. I know one of my tendencies is to interrupt or talk over people. I'm going to be really cognizant of waiting until somebody's finished or being an active listener before I speak up, right? Little things like that and little steps every day for a year will give you so much more progress in the area of just responding to others. And then also just beginning with the end in mind, like asking yourself, how do I want this meeting to go? How do I want this one-on-one to go? How do I want my relationship with my intern or with the people that report to me? Like, how do I want those relationships to go? How do I want my relationship with my boss to be, right? So kind of like beginning with the end in mind and using certain feeling words and descriptor words or scenarios, right? Mapping that out for yourself is going to help you change your tendencies and ultimately respond so that you create your new reality. So, and then the last thing I would say is like, ask people the response they want from you. Like you would be blown away how valued people feel when you ask them that question. Don't just ask them, what is it like to be on the other side of me? What is it like to be on the other side of my emails or the other side of being in a one-on-one meeting with me? But ask like, hey, when this happens, what's the ideal response for you? In a perfect world, how would you like your boss or your team member to respond to XYZ scenario, right? I was in an interview one time with an intern and we were diving into some of her previous work experience. And she was telling me just about a really negative experience that she had with somebody she reported to. And then, so I just asked her like, what is the best way for your team leader to respond to you? Like, what is the best way to support you? What is the best way to speak to you in those scenarios? Asking people that, like, it will help you really kind of tailor your approach and be a lot more emotionally intelligent in that regard. And it will just show people how much you value them if you're doing it with the right heart. So those are some of my bullet points and top tips for how to read and how to respond in the framework of the 3 R's. But I don't know what you guys think.
It's good, Rachel. I even the takeaway was the response, right? What do you do as a result now that you have all that stuff in place? Hampton had a great point that he made earlier. He's like, I feel myself drifting away from a conversation. So the corrected action is he's going to plant his feet. He's going to plant his feet where he's at, to spend the time with that person to develop the relationship instead of just focusing on what he has to do next. For me, it's like kind of the opposite. It's setting alarms 5 minutes before a meeting's supposed to end so that I can know that it needs to be wrapping up, so that I'm respectful of the next thing that I have to get to. I also didn't want to discount. I saw Paul Feldman put a question down here in the chat. If we have time, we can touch on this really quickly. I would love to hear y'all's thoughts, but reading the room in a home office environment. I know, Rachel, you just talked a lot about how do you read in certain situations. How would you even specifically, what advice or wisdom you would give specifically around somebody who's working fully remote and how they could better read other people in the environment that they're specifically in?
Yeah. So before I came to WildSpark, for 3 solid years, I was like in a fully remote environment, right? And I was also working for like a very fast-paced tech startup. So the work was nonstop, and the teamwork and the collaboration had to be on point, right? And so reading the room in a home office environment, first and foremost, I would say have a standard that cameras are on. In those 3 years, didn't turn my camera on that much, and it wasn't a culture of turning on your camera that much. And when I came to WildSpark, where we have a culture where we always have cameras on, and if you don't have your camera on, you just kind of give a reason why. It sounds controlling. It's not, though. What it's about is really just that kind of body language and face-to-face communication that you need with people to really be able to connect, right? Because that barrier that you have between people is so much greater, and there's so much more room for miscommunication when you're in a remote environment. So first and foremost, I would say, unless there's some exception, like have cameras on, because it's easy to just sort of neglect that, and comfortable to just neglect that. The second thing I would say is that give opportunities like for people to speak up, because it's really hard sometimes to have a good dialogue with people in a home environment or a remote environment, right? So I think creating space for people to speak is a huge part of learning how to sort of read, and then as a byproduct, be able to respond with where they're at. Because often things can get really cut off when everybody's trying to speak, and that in-person element is missing. And then also I would just say, like, how are people, I would say then from there, I mean, there are a lot of like body language cues that you can follow, a lot of engagement cues that you can follow. Can you see certain flashes on the screen where, people aren't really engaged because they're browsing the web or things like that? Like, I think having certain standards that a remote culture or a remote first culture is still going to be an engaging in-person type culture that can really help you set up for success, and then be able to take some of the tips that we shared and still implement them. But I definitely say the number one thing would be like to create room for people to speak, because it's a lot harder, and it can feel a little bit more intimidating when you're in a remote culture.
That's good. Hampton, would you add anything there?
No, I think that's a wonderful answer. And I know that our webinar we did a few months ago, it was on leading remote teams. And I also think there's a lot of things in there that could address that answer. But good to hear from you, Paul. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's good.
And
I guess I'll add into here. The only other things that I was thinking about is just really leaning in even more, Paul, to like the way that people ask questions. What kind of questions are they asking? What does response time look like? Is it also a great indicator? I know a lot of remote work is through different chat functions, which it's hard, right? There's no body language there. There's no tone of voice in chat. And so it's really difficult to read some of those things, but you can look at some things like response time. I think when in doubt, hop on a call. We use Slack internally. They have like a huddle feature. So versus just sending a bunch of text back and forth in a chat, like always opt towards a phone call, so you can actually hear tone of voice and some of those things to better read those environments. So I think put in a couple of systems, Paul, that just encourage more conversational focus. It's typically what's missing in a home office environment, is there's not as many organic conversations that are happening that would typically happen in a in-person office. So try to do that as much as possible is what I I would recommend there.
Yeah. Also, if you guys can create a culture where people use GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it, and emojis, that helps. I know it sounds silly, but it
Bonus
really
points.
it makes people smile, or it helps you kind of gauge like where somebody's emotionally at with that stuff. Like we're really good about that at Wild Spark. Like somebody announces something on Slack, like to just give it a simple thumbs up, or somebody celebrating to like respond. Like there's a way that you can underneath it respond with emojis. Like usually people will do that, just to sort of give a read for where they're at with that news. So sounds silly, but makes a big impact, especially with millennials and Gen Z.
For sure. All right, this is super important. We've all probably heard an element of this before, but information without action is just entertainment. And so I don't want you to just get on these monthly webinars and say, okay, yeah, that Wild Spark team, that stuff is pretty good. We want you to take action with this, and that doesn't necessarily mean buying Wild Spark. I promise you that. But here's the thing, like we've all been to webinars, we've all gone to conferences, and we've heard something and not really done anything about it. And that's a problem. We really want people to take action. And I think one of the best ways to take action is through accountability. And one of the best ways to have accountability is being in community with other people, which is what we're really trying to create at Wild Spark. We've got content around these things that Josh Swing is going to talk about here in a minute, specifically around relational wisdom, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, things like that. We also have content here in our Leader Launchpad unit called Identity. That would be a lesson you get to do where you actually get to take the DISC assessment. But one thing that you're going to see from Wild Spark is it's not just content delivery. I think that there's a lot of good content out there. I don't think the content is the problem. If content wasn't an issue, then y'all wouldn't be on this webinar. You would be buying a book and just giving it to the people on your team and asking them to read it, and the world would be perfect and we'd all be self-aware. I think it's really the delivery of these things that becomes the problem. We don't make the space for it. We don't have enough. We say that we don't have enough time, or there's not accountability structured. And so what you'll find through Wild Spark, if you're thinking about how do I bring this to the rest of my team, like my executives, they have a coach, but our middle managers, we don't do anything. Our high potentials, the rest of our team, we don't do much for leadership development. And we have some really self-unaware people. How do I do that? What you can expect from Wild Spark is just going to be a 30-minute monthly lesson. And it can be on these topics that we're talking about. So people are going to do those lessons on their own. But our clients are telling us their favorite part is they're coming together in groups, double the size of me, Rachel, and Swing, and having a conversation and saying, yeah, here's what I learned about myself as I went through the other side of me lesson. And ultimately, here's the action that I'm going to take. And guess what? Next month, when we come back together and talk for just 45 minutes, we're going to follow up and make sure that we went through with that. I just think that a lot of times in organizations, we get busy. We don't have systems and structures in place for things like this. So at Wild Spark, we're just trying to give you something that takes 1% of your time. It's actually going to lead to this not being entertainment, but action. So Swing, I'll pass it to you to talk a little bit about some of the units we have around this.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of technical questions that came up that Rachel, you may be able to answer best. Carrie asked, where can she find the webinar on leading remote teams? And Corinne asked, how are you going to send the slides and worksheets?
Yeah, I responded. Really quick. I responded to Carrie in the comments. Carrie, okay. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you don't want to share your email address, I can send it to you. And Corinne, after this, we're going to email everything out after this. When you registered for this webinar, it should have asked you to put your email in. And so that's how we're going to get it to you. If you didn't have to go through that process for some reason, make sure that you drop your email here, or you can share it with me. I'm on LinkedIn. You can look me up, Rachel Merritt. But back to what you were saying, Swing.
Yeah. To Hampton's point, we need systems. Imagine having a group around you that's also working on being a better version of themselves, that you can plainly ask, what am I really good at and what am I really bad at? And what can I do to get better? That makes all the difference in the world, having people around you that you can trust to do that. And that's really what Wild Spark provides, is a sense of community and teams to be able to talk about that stuff with at work. And so these are a couple of topics that we would focus on, put some concentrated effort towards. These are two examples that relate directly to some of the content that we shared today. If you're like, hey, all this sounds really awesome, I'd love to learn more about it, we go in more depth in the actual WildSpark content. So the other side of me represents 3 months worth of content that we would give to you, knowing yourself, knowing your strengths, knowing your impact on others. A lot of what we unpack today. And then relational wisdom, which is another phrase that we use for emotional intelligence, looking at soft skills, relationship building, and emotional intelligence. In that, you actually take an emotional intelligence quiz to see how emotionally intelligent you are. So you want to be convicted a little bit, do the relational wisdom unit, and you'll find out very quickly what your assessment looks like around some of those key areas. But just 2 examples of things that you can focus on with your team if you wanted to scale this throughout your organization to help make everybody more self-aware and more empathetic and more relationally wise with how they interact with other people and what.
And Swing, just to build off of what you said, like, you may think that personal development or leadership development on an individual basis, though it's important, and though we teach at WildSpark that it is the foundation of everything else in leadership, like, when it happens on an island, it's very lonely and it's not very effective. And if you think that you can be the change for all these other people in your organization, a lot of times, despite your best efforts and your heart being in the right place, it's just not the case. And so I speak from a decade of experience, deeply personal experience that I could share with you off the side if you're interested. But the point is that when you have people on your team who are all aligned on these types of topics, you would not believe the effects it has on your bottom line, your efficiency, all of these other things. So it's not just great to create a great culture that's focused on emotional intelligence. It's not just beneficial to have people in meetings meetings go better and things like that, but it's even better in terms of your productivity, in terms of your communication, because you're able to just get more done, right? So a team that is emotionally intelligent, the sky is the limit. So that's why we really focus on team-based leader development at WildSpark.
That's good.
Well, we didn't have a ton of questions. I think Paul had a great question about what this emotional intelligence stuff looks like in the context of a remote team. And we had some really good feedback on the DISC assessment. But if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can reach out to any one of us on LinkedIn or the WildSpark page and shoot us a message. And we would love to chat with you further. And I'm excited to share with you guys what our February webinar is going to be. So at the beginning of the year, I took a WildSpark poll, and asked a bunch of leaders, what is the area that your workplace needs to grow in the most? The first one was emotional intelligence. A lot of people said emotional intelligence. And then a close second was our communication skills. Now, I think those two are pretty closely linked. However, there's some stuff on the communication side of things that deserves its own webinar. And so we're really excited to dig into this topic next month. So there's the QR code, or you can just find the registration. It'll be right there at the top of the WildSpark LinkedIn page. Go find us, go like us, and then go register for this webinar. It's going to be a doozy. So it's going to be a good one. And we just released a new communication unit to help improve communication in the workplace in all different contexts. And so we're going to be kind of using that as inspiration for this. And so we're so excited to talk with you about it.
Yes, we are fired up. And if you get the chance to do WildSpark in our communication that moves people unit, you will see things or see actors by the names of Will Ferrell, Ryan Reynolds. You'll see some Hamilton clips, maybe some Parks and Rec. So I promise WildSpark isn't all movies, but we want to show you things that are entertaining so that we can learn best. And we like humor too. So you'll enjoy it.
We may have to pull in some of the movie clips to our next webinar and just get some laughter, get some comedic relief going in the webinar. But thank you all for being a part of this. I know that just by you showing up to this webinar shows that you care about being more self-aware and how other people perceive you. And I think that's the first step, is just caring. And so I can't wait to see what happens as a result of some of the things that we talked about today. Hopefully you all are able to implement some of these things in your life and to think very practically about how you can better influence others, because that's really what we're all trying to do here. So thanks again.
Yes. Thank you all. And remember, information without action is just entertainment. And if you're looking for entertainment, let us know and we'll just come and tell some jokes. We all have microphones. We might even sing too. But if you're looking for action, let us know about that too. And we'll give you some good ideas. We appreciate y'all coming.
Yeah. Thanks guys. Hope you have a good rest of your day.